German philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein once wrote, "Some things cannot be said, they must be shown." That wisdom is now being applied to some of the most innovative companies in the world through a process called digital transformation.
The future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed. Yet. Today's world teems with innovation. The nexus of hardware, software, and human ingenuity promises a revolution in possibilities. What does tomorrow look like? Witness future proof.
Eric Kavanagh here, and folks, I am so excited about today's show. I've been working for a long time to get these guys on the show. Let me tell you, I saw a demo back in 2019 of a technology, a company called Mendix. That's MENDIX. And what these folks did, this is 2 years ago that I saw it, is they developed a visual programming language to allow business and technology people to sit down at the table and map out new products, new workflows, basically. So we talk all the time about digital transformation on this show. I mean, it's a bit trite in terms of people on the inside talking about it, but that's just because I'm in the media. In the real world out there, it's everywhere these days. Digital transformation is everywhere. It's happening all the time, and it's very exciting. It's basically the future being designed right here in the present. And what we talk about Mendix, they are categorized in various ways. One is a low-code or no-code platform. So what does that mean? Basically, you can code, you can hack out code to do things in all sorts of different languages. A lot of people are not developers. It's a very certain kind of personality to become a developer. I myself hacked out code when I was 13 or 14 years old on a Commodore 64. I wrote a couple of programs in BASIC. That's a pretty simple programming language, but they worked. I created little video games that we used to play, and that was fun. And I realized I don't really want to do that for a living. In fact, I even remember in New Orleans in the year 2000 and, what was it? I'm like, it's longer than that. We're talking 1990s. 1997, I think I realized that I'd done a couple websites for people, and I could see how quickly the web design world was moving forward, and things like JavaScript, for example. And I realized quickly, I'm like, look, if I want to do this, I need to focus just on code and not worry about all these other things, because there's no way I'm going to be able to keep up. And I made a good decision to focus on public relations and content, and then of course, big data and technology and all that stuff. So we learned about it, but coding is a certain thing that it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. You really have to focus and think about what you're doing and understand the parameters and have your space, put your headphones on, go into the zone and get it done. And that's what coders do. And they're amazing coders these days. Though I did hear an interesting stat that says every 2 years, the number of coders out in the world is doubling, which means at any given point in time, half the coders out there are newbies. They've been working for less than 2 years. So that's a pretty interesting thing to consider. So where am I going with this? Low code, no code is great because it allows business people to sit down and see the workflow and understand, talk to the technology people. And instead of just kind of doing a requirements document and then handing it over and hoping that it all works out 6 months later, that's the old waterfall, as we used to call it. You need a more agile approach. And with DevOps, you get the developers working directly with the business people. Well, now with these low code platforms, and I think Mendix is one of the best that I've seen, the people on the company can actually sit down and map out how this stuff is supposed to work. And then that's what gives you your digital transformation, as opposed to just telling the developers, look, we want to be able to do this and that and the other thing. Because anyone who's done this will tell you it's very difficult to gather requirements effectively. If you try to put them onto a piece of paper and say what you need, it's actually a pretty difficult thing to do, which is why a lot of applications didn't turn out the way people wanted them to. So anyway, Mendix is a very interesting company. We're going to be talking to Sheryl Koenigsberg, and we also have Conway Solomon on the call from a company called Wristband, a technology company that's based, wait for it, in New Orleans. Yes. So excited to see New Orleans really just rocking and rolling these days. I've been a New Orleans native for many years on and off. Great to see that. We'll hear from him in the second segment. But without further ado, Sheryl Koenigsberg of Mendix, welcome to DM Radio. Tell us a bit about yourself and about this super cool technology you guys have built called this low-code platform. Tell us what it does and how it works.
Yeah, thanks, Eric, and thanks for having me on. I am a huge fan of all things data. My whole career has been in data, started with backup systems, and I was one of those weirdos who loved backups and backup
Nice,
systems, spent a lot of time on that, secondary
nice.
storage, and over the years have kind of moved up the stack, as it were, into the application space, which is how I landed at Mendix. Um, and, Mendix is one of the companies that really invented and has shaped the low code market in many ways. So, not a new company. We've been around for over a decade. All sorts of customers and use cases. I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk about a lot of this. But indeed, we were founded with this principle of uniting business and IT and really providing a platform where the people who are developing the software and the people who have the business requirements can collaborate in a really easy visual way. That's not to say that what they deliver is less sophisticated than something you would build in a traditional platform. Conway will share a bit about that, and I can talk about some customers too. But it is a very accessible type of platform for a really broad set of people to collaborate with.
Yeah, and you know what is really cool about this, and this is what got me so excited. For decades, we had this business IT rift, and there was a lot of acrimony between the business people and the IT people. You had fiefdoms on both sides. We could talk all day about the horror stories of business not getting along with IT, which obviously makes zero sense from a business perspective and from an IT perspective. But it was because these different groups knew different things, and the domain of expertise in coding is vast. You hear about full stack developers these days. They're kind of hard to find because it's just so expansive. I mean, there's so much stuff to know and to understand. But what really gets me excited about this no code or low code movement is the fact that, first of all, it is enterprise grade now. It really can bang out the grittiest, most durable functions that you need the business to do. But what's cool is that in the process of using this technology, in your case, Mendix, both the business and the IT people can learn about each other and what they're doing. So you can have this layer of abstraction through which you not only design the future of the company, but explain what's happening to both sides. So the business people could say, well, the reason we need this exception is because there are certain cases where this partner gets involved. And in that case, we have to do this or whatever. Those are the exceptions. And I can tell you, in business, in systems design, exception management is always the toughest nut to crack, because you can automate, 80, 90% of something, but then what about those 10 to 20% of cases where you're not supposed to do that? Well, that's where this conversation can really flourish, and the IT people can go, oh, that's what you've been talking about. What do you think about that, Sheryl? Is that about right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things we're seeing that's really interesting along those lines is business units themselves having their own IT resources within the business unit now.
Right.
So there are still many structures with centralized IT, but we're also seeing a lot of IT moving into the business units and creating these kind of fusion teams of business and IT that might be permanent or might just be project based, but who are trying to work together. And I think over time really learn a lot from each other. And we've even seen instances where business people learn so much about developing Mendix, they go on to become Mendix developers.
That's
right?
So cool.
Because there's such a close interlock now between those sides.
Well, once you understand how things work, I mean, this is the beauty of, I think, the human mind, right? Once you understand how something works, it's no longer magical. It's no longer mystical or scary, quite frankly. You go, oh, that's how it works. I get it now. And we just need some education to help get us there. But guess what? People, especially in IT, are always under pressure to get things done. They're always under pressure to keep the trains running on time. This is why there's an understandable concern about bringing in new technologies. But like you say, and this is the point I made at the top of the hour here, digital transformation must happen right now. If you're a company that's been around for 25 or 30 years, I guarantee there are systems that you need to upgrade. And we talk about it in our company. We published a white paper called The New Stack, and it talks about Apache, Cassandra, and Kafka, and some of these other technologies, and how these are scale out technologies. that are just, I mean, not just mildly better than their predecessors, amazingly better. And so all the new companies that you see out there, the ones that are going public, almost all of them are leveraging this incredibly powerful technology. And what I am suggesting here, folks, is that your company can get there by exploring this kind of technology. And I'd like to bring in this concept, Sheryl, of a citizen developer, right? So we have this concept of a citizen data scientist, for example. And the idea is that if you equip a non-developer or let's say someone who isn't terribly experienced with the right technology to build their applications, then their vision can come true. They can see what needs to happen. It could be very hard to explain in a sort of imperative programming fashion, but in a declarative programming fashion, it's not so hard to explain. And if you can build it yourself and understand, that's when you really get the aha moments. And that's who's going to help transform your company, right, Sheryl?
Well, that's true, Eric. You know, you're bringing me back to my comp sci days with declarative and imperative. I became actually really good at Lisp. So I had this very completely useless skill set around recursive programming, which never really reached much commercial use. But I do hold the achievement of once having written a Lisp interpreter in Lisp,
Wow.
which will just, you know, explode your mind.
Cool.
But yeah, you know, what you're saying about digital transformation or digitalization or, you know, whatever buzzword you do or don't want to use, I mean, that has never been in such high relief than in the past 16 or 18 months, right?
Wow.
Everybody got sent home from work on a Friday,
Right.
then told not to come back on Monday. All the schools closed, right? We told our kids, you're learning on Zoom.
That's
and
right.
everything from, you know, I mean, I live in an urban setting, right? So in many ways, we were already accustomed to like ordering our groceries online, but I wasn't really accustomed to seeing my doctor online. Like telehealth was new, right?
Right.
And from a business perspective, we were used to making, you know, visits to our customers in person, and anybody who's in retail was used to having a retail situation. So people really needed to address this, I mean, really overnight. And low code and no code in many ways solved a lot of that kind of skills gap very immediately for people. One of the places we saw that right away was in municipalities. So, you know, think about like standing in line to renew your driver's license, think about having to go pay, you know, your excise tax or whatever it is, wherever you live in the country, and how much you have to go to City Hall for certain transactions. You have to show proof of identity to receive your pension in certain municipalities. Like there are all sorts of really important municipal services that suddenly had to go online. And we had a lot of cities and states and counties, you know, city of San Antonio in Texas, turn to Mendix and very quickly get things online to make sure the really critical services like food distribution, like housing, were online and available for constituents. So low code played a really important role there. But you actually asked me about citizen development. I did that thing when I answered not the question you asked.
It's all good. It works. Go ahead.
So citizen development is really interesting to us at Mendix because we started with this platform that united business and IT. And part of that platform was really robust collaboration tools. And part of that platform was an interface that professional developers used that let them add some stuff in Java if they wanted, that gave them all the control over logic that they wanted, gave them really advanced UI tools. They could edit CSS, like all that kind of stuff. But we also introduced a tool for business developers to create their logic flow, where they could go on to a web-based app and start developing their app. And it wasn't a prototype, it was an actual working app, database getting created in the background. And they could bring that to the professional developers and say, this is what I want it to do. And the professional developers could pick up right there. So we created that with this business IT thing in mind. But over time, as it's been this interest and rise from business people to solve their own problems, we've seen the rise of citizen developers as well. And those are people who are like, you know, that guy who, you know, sits near you and like has all the Excel macros figured out. or the person on the team everybody goes to for like the Power BI stuff.
Right.
And those guys are great candidates to like start building stuff in low code. They have the mindset, they have the skill set.
Talking all about digital transformation, seeing is believing, all about the low code and no code movement. And just for some background, folks, every software application that has ever been built or written was designed to automate something. So in a way, you always want the interface with the user to be a sort of low code, no code environment. But now what's happening these days is that we've become so sophisticated at doing this kind of stuff, we can really pull it off to have a nice visual design layer that you can collaborate, business and IT can collaborate to get something done, and then you publish that and it runs, and it's now running your business. So it's really fun and really exciting stuff. And here next with us is Conway Solomon from a company called Wristband, WRSTBND, if I recall correctly. And you're based in New Orleans, baby. Woohoo! So Conway, right. Tell us a bit about yourself and Wristband and what you're doing with Mendix.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. Appreciate you having us on the show. So Wristband is an event technology provider for the live entertainment industry. That means that the markets that we work within are a lot of festivals, concerts, even museums, theme parks, really anywhere that a group of people are showing up, generally to have a good time in some capacity. So I think, the two ends of that spectrum are those types of festivals and concerts that are generally just going to be somewhere for a day or for a weekend and then it's gone. And then we have a number of events that run for 3 months or 6 or even 12 months out of the year that are more permanent or seasonal based attractions, which, people are kind of always ask us, how do we get into that? And what I always say is, it's like having a festival every day. You might not be as many people, but you run one of those properties, it's like dealing with a festival every day, whether it's 100 people or 1,000 people. Or 100,000 people, frankly, it's a whole nother animal to deal with the actual logistics and operations of bringing those people on site and making sure they each have a good time. Yeah. I think as you can imagine, our business has been very unique in the last year, given that we haven't done a lot of that. So it's definitely been a bit of a changing environment, really day by day at this point, but we can certainly already see the other side of this, whether or not we kind of slow down for a little bit before kind of really getting back into it. It's very clear that, we're getting close to the other side of it. And more importantly, from a technology perspective or from a data perspective, I think that there's been a new standard that the pandemic has set when it comes to users' expectations of technology, whether that's for a contactless manner of buying something or picking something up, or Sheryl having it delivered to your house. Like, I haven't been in a grocery store in months at this point, so it's kind of like the same idea. I think that what I'm very curious to see a little bit still about is when the pandemic is said and done, what sticks around and becomes things that maybe we moved into because of the pandemic, but we'll stay with because we look at and go, well, gosh, yes, despite the fact that it's over, this software or whatever it might be, this process or flow, like you said, this new automated flow, why would I go back from that? Like, you don't want to go back to having festivals show up where it's a mass chaos and you don't know where you're supposed to go and whose lines. And it's just like, well, we're going to wing it when we get there. I mean, Eric, if you've been through Jazz Fest, you certainly know what that feels like. That's the epitome of just winging it when everybody shows up, I think sometimes. Disclaimer, we don't work for them quite yet, so I can say that. But the point is I think funny. That's what we're very curious about, is kind of like what happens with that. And so, yeah, we provide a lot of those services, whether it's for entry, for payment at buying food, drinks, merchandise, experiential or sponsor level interactions. Maybe you're entering your name to win a prize or a raffle, or you won 2 free beers and now you're going to go redeem them. So there's kind of a lot of layers to it, but what we're really focused on is how to deliver that optimal user experience when people actually, arrive for their event.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, New Orleans does the events better than most other places, but to your point, it gets chaotic when there's a huge crowd and you're trying to understand what's going on. And you also want to analyze and figure out, well, what worked, what didn't work. All these things are fueled by data and understanding. And you guys are doing some interesting stuff. I know you talked about how you use Mendix to design some new types of workflows, but you also will do traditional way. Talk about how you use Mendix versus how you deploy when you need to scale something.
So there's a few factors that are unique about our business as a whole, as well as how we started to use Mendix. What's unique about Wristband that I think Sheryl can kind of probably allude to a little bit better is that we are one of the kind of more unique or few customers that is using Mendix to really build truly external facing tools, consumer products and consumer facing interfaces. And not to say that we're alone by any means, but what I think is very interesting is we did not come into Mendix from a perspective of, being a big company that had some legacy process or system that needed to be overhauled or changed, kind of like you alluded to, whether it was 25 or 30 years that it's been running. We came into it going, we need to find a tool that allows us to stay fast and competitive and efficient in this industry. And knowing that the entertainment industry has a lot of variables, no matter how hard you try. It's one of the most impossible industries, I would say, to build a tool or a system that works for everybody, because it's just like, how many events have you been to that are even similar? Like, usually not even that many. It's like events have such a unique signature to each of them. And yeah, there's overlaps and commonalities, but each event is unique. And that was actually kind of what got me really interested and kind of hooked on the event world personally to begin with, is that, I grew up always playing with computers and kind of hacking together things here and there, but I never got into, software or raw code development as a professional career. It was always more of a hobby for me. And so, when we got kind of more into it from the event world, I always had that kind of shiny object syndrome where do one thing and you figure it out and it's like, well, now I'm bored and I want to move on to the next thing.
Yeah, right.
And the event world was very captivating, right? Because it was like, wow, there's a new challenge for each one of these, but that also presents its own challenges in the sense that, like, can we build a system that does have enough functionality or customization for them, either configurable by the user, or more importantly, where we use Mendix a lot is that, if a platform works for an event generally 90% of the way, or even 95%, you might as well have zero, because it's one of those things where if it doesn't work exactly how they want it or how they need it, the tendency is to regress and fall back and go, we're going to go back to Google Sheets. And so we found a substantial amount of success with Mendix because it was a way that actually allowed us to get to that 100% level without spending just an absolute fortune of time and money and effort. And, like, oh, yeah, it's going to cost you 200 grand for your festival. And they're like, wait a second, we only do 100,000 in ticket sales. Like, we can't, and so I think that's been what's been unique about how we did it, is that we came into Mendix as this was selected as our tool that would allow us to have that competitive edge. And that's been the case now for almost 7 years. Behind the scenes.
Well, and what's interesting, you hit on something I think that's very compelling, which is speed to value, if you will, and design time. Yeah. So we referenced earlier in the old world of enterprise software, which is still all around us. It's still in lots of different companies. Things change slowly. Oh, yeah. Right. One of my favorite people in the world is my buddy Jimmy Malone, who studied with the Dalai Lama's right-hand man for a couple of years. And so he walked away with some pretty clever expressions. And he said, things don't change quickly until they do. Right. I'm like, whoa, that's pretty deep. COVID, right? Wasn't changing quickly. Yeah. And then pow, it's changed completely. But you make a really good point that being able to very quickly ascertain a situation, a market opportunity, design something to manage it, deploy that, market it, sell it, etc. That cycle time has to be very short these days if you're going to get anywhere, because there are big players. They don't move as fast as the small guys do, but they figure stuff out eventually, and then they co-opt or they use the same language or whatever. But you made a really good point that being able to very quickly go from understanding a market opportunity to designing an app to do something about it, market and sell that thing, that's a short cycle time. And so that's how you guys have been able to stay agile, right, yourselves, is by approaching it with this low code, no code that does allow you to insert the custom code you want to do specific things, but to at least get to the minimum viable product very quickly, right, Conway?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely the case. And I think, we've learned a substantial amount about Mendex. We were definitely one of their earliest customers, and still to this day are pretty heavy disciples. But I'll tell you real quick, which is funny, is that we've now been on Mendex so long that we have legacy platforms that are legacy Mendex platforms that we look at that we're like, what were we thinking when we wrote it that way? It's one of those things, like, you look back at your own work and you're like, how did I think that was a good way to do it? And it's really funny because some of our earliest platforms, we've just gotten so familiar, and the platform has developed so much, and we have developed in our understanding, not just of the environments that we're developing for, but of the toolkit as a whole, that, we have a number of systems now that we look back at, we're like, at some point we got to just rewrite that, and they're actually already in Mendex. But, just like you would with any other code platform, you look at it and go, gosh, there's so many things that I would do differently now, just with what we've already learned in that short period of time. So my business partner, who's our CTO, Jonathan, I can't tell you how many times he's rewritten some of our platforms. Just like every month, he's like, you know what, I'm going to start over. And I'm like, do you think we could just stick with one version for a little while? And he's like, this one's going to be so much better. It's going to have this. And you're like, you know what, at the end of the day, if it's worth it, let's do it. But you did speak to cycle time. And that is something that's critical for us as well, especially in the event world. And this year couldn't be a better example of that. I'll give you a perfect example. We actually, my office is very quiet today, which is nice. Actually, about 6 of our team members are down in Mexico for 2 weeks to do a festival. We've got about 30,000 people, 2 weekends in a row in Rosarito Beach on the beach for an event called Baja Beach Fest. And about 60 days ago, maybe even less than that, the festival came to us and said, hey, the city of Rosarito, or apologies, I don't know the exact terminology of what they call the municipality, but the city is requiring that we prove and show that we have a true vaccine verification or COVID testing plan. And they really needed something that wasn't just like, for lack of better words, PR for publicity. And oh yeah, we're checking people. And then, like, you see these videos from the event, and there's some guy in sunglasses who you hold up a piece of paper, and it could be in crayon that says I'm vaccinated, and they come on in. And so it's like, no, how do you do it? How do you really do it to a level that somebody would sign off and go, yeah, I get that nothing is perfect, but you've given it the best effort, and it's accountable and we can track. And so real quick, what I'll say about that is, they asked us, could we develop a platform that every attendee, all 60,000 of the event, would be required to upload either a copy of their vaccine card, which would be visually approved, checked, verified on our side, and then as soon as it's approved, allow their wristband to get them into the event. If it's denied, or until they do that, they physically cannot enter into the event. So despite the fact that they've got their wristband, the security guard is not going to let them in. And actually, he will actually grab them and pull them to the side, because it will say, this person didn't do anything from their vaccine side. We don't even know what state they're in. We also connected from an API perspective directly to the testing provider on site, where you go get your test, they tap your wristband, scan the barcode of your test, put you into a separate holding area alone from everybody else. And then based off the results of that, they automatically, when they scan the results, again, also approves or denies you if your wristband can get in to the event. So things like that, that was 60 days ago. They asked us for it. We had it up and running in less than 20 days with all the integrations and all the design. And we've already done over, I just looked this morning, I think 13,000 vaccines in the past few days. And it's ramping up like every hour right now, because we're getting close to the gates open tomorrow. It's like, there's another 1,000 coming in. So we've got a team of agents right now that are sitting at home with the queue system, approving and rejecting and typing notes. it's very interesting. We would not be able to do that, nor would that festival from a cost perspective if we didn't have that cycle time, as you alluded to, from Mendix.
Well, folks, look these guys up online, Mendix, MENDIX, and wristband. Big thank you to all of our listeners out there.